Alaska is a place that reminds you, from the very first breath of cold air, that human presence here is temporary. The land was shaped long before us, and it will remain long after. More than 600,000 square miles of mountains, valleys, and ancient ice, yet only a thin line of towns, villages, and scattered outposts mark where people try, quietly, stubbornly, to live against a landscape that never truly softens. Every year, hikers, hunters, researchers, pilots, travelers, they disappear here. Some are found within days, others not at all. And among all those disappearances, a few stand out not because they're dramatic, but because they leave behind details that refuse to sit neatly inside a logical explanation. Details that survive. This is one of those cases, a disappearance that occurred on the edge of an ancient lake, believed to have been frozen longer than any settlement in the region. A place locals avoid in winter, not out of fear, but out of respect, and a sense that the ice sometimes behaves in ways it shouldn't. Tonight, we're going to retrace the final known hours of a photographer who traveled alone into the backcountry, determined to capture the northern lights reflected across a sheet of untouched ice. What happened next has been debated by investigators, outdoorsmen, and locals ever since. Not because it was supernatural, but because every possible explanation, weather, wildlife, hypothermia, missteps, leaves at least one crucial detail unresolved. This is the story of Kasiluk Lake and the man who walked out onto the snow and never walked back. Eli Turner left the lodge early that morning, checking out as planned, his backpack packed with cameras, GPS, and essentials for the trek into the backcountry. He drove north along the winter road toward Kasiluk Lake, a remote frozen body of water nestled deep in the Alaskan wilderness. Back in town, Eli's friend expected the usual messages, a quick check-in, a short note to confirm he had arrived safely. Morning passed, noon passed, still nothing. At first, the silence seemed explainable. Eli had a habit of getting lost in his work, immersed in photography or navigating trails where cell service didn't reach. By late afternoon, concern began to set in, a sense that something was wrong. Every attempt to reach him went unanswered. Calls went straight to voicemail. Texts remained unopened. The quiet was unusual enough that the feeling of unease grew heavier with each passing hour. Finally, as evening approached, his friend called the Talkeetna Police Department to report Eli missing. A small team was dispatched to the lodge where he had stayed the night before to gather information about his last known movements. The lodge manager remembered clearly. Eli had checked out early, packed his gear carefully, and left with a focused determination, not a trace of hesitation. Another guest on the same floor recalled seeing him consult a map and ask the front desk about the trail leading toward Kasiluk Lake. Security cameras captured him, stepping out of the lodge, crossing the parking lot, and driving north, the last confirmed sighting of him. Using this information, police and local search teams began piecing together Eli's intended route. They tracked the snow road north, eventually locating the SUV abandoned near the trailhead that led into the backcountry. The vehicle was intact, showing no signs of accident or foul play, simply left behind. From there, search efforts turned to the trail leading into the forest and toward Kasiluk Lake. Investigators carefully examined footprints, bent branches, and other environmental clues to reconstruct Eli's path. Every step, every mark told a story of deliberate, experienced movement. A hiker who knew the wilderness and respected its dangers. And yet, as the trail approached the frozen lake, the footprint stopped. No evidence of struggle, no tracks leading back into the forest. Just the quiet, cold, and empty expanse of ice. The last place anyone had seen Eli. It was clear that something had occurred within this short stretch of wilderness. There was no mystery beyond the physical world, no supernatural forces at play, yet the fact remained Eli Turner, an experienced photographer and outdoorsman, had disappeared without leaving a trace beyond the careful marks he had made in the snow. By the following morning, search teams had narrowed their focus to the trail leading to Kasiluk Lake. Temperatures remained well below freezing, snow packed hard underfoot, and the landscape stretched endlessly, unbroken except for occasional clumps of black spruce. Every step forward required careful attention. A slip or misstep could become fatal in minutes. The SUV had been located near the edge of the trailhead. Inside, nothing appeared amiss. Maps, spare batteries, and Eli's personal items were accounted for. There were no signs of foul play, no evidence that anyone else had been present. Investigators concluded that whatever had occurred had happened after Eli left the vehicle. Following his footprints, the team moved cautiously through the last stretch of forest before the lake opened into a vast expanse of ice. The first sight of Kasiluk Lake under the weak winter sun was breathtaking, a perfectly flat sheet of frozen water stretching beyond the horizon, surrounded by snow-laden hills. But its beauty offered no comfort. The stillness of the lake made every sound carry unnaturally, amplifying the isolation. Near the shoreline, searchers found the first evidence of Eli's presence on the ice. Footprints carefully spaced, consistent with deliberate, steady walking. Alongside them were impressions from the tripod he had carried and small depressions in the snow where he had likely set down equipment to adjust settings. A thermos, partially buried in drifted snow, was found tipped over, as if it had been used and then left without concern. What immediately struck the searchers was the consistency and directionality of the prints. There were no signs of hesitation, no sudden detours, no erratic movements that might indicate panic or disorientation. Every footprint suggested Eli knew exactly where he was going, and yet the trail would soon reach an abrupt, inexplicable end. Approximately 5 to 7 feet from the shoreline, the prints simply stopped. No continuation across the ice, no tracks back toward the forest. The surrounding snow showed no indication of struggle. The ice itself appeared unbroken and stable, though later measurements would show subtle variations in thickness and slight stress patterns caused by temperature fluctuations. Near this point, investigators discovered other items. The GPS beacon, which had been carefully placed on the ice, and the camera, lying face down and partially covered by snow. Both devices were intact and operational. The camera contained the last photographs Eli had taken, wide static images of the frozen lake and surrounding hills, but nothing to indicate what had happened next. Even the subtle marks on the ice, small depressions and faint scratches, were consistent with someone handling equipment and moving carefully, not with a fall or accident. In other words, the scene provided clear signs of human activity, but offered no clue as to how Eli had disappeared so completely. Searchers spread out, examining the shoreline and the surrounding forest. They measured ice thickness at several points, looked for hidden cracks or thin spots, and scanned the tree line for disturbances. every logical explanation. Slipping through thin ice, disorientation, encountering wildlife left at least one gap. The marks and objects on the lake suggested deliberate, controlled movement, yet the person responsible was nowhere to be found. By mid-afternoon, teams had documented all visible evidence. Photographs, GPS coordinates, and detailed sketches were logged. Every footprint, every impression, every object was cataloged. The lake remained silent and undisturbed beyond these markers, a flat white sheet that reflected both the pale winter sun and the growing concern of those who had come to search. It was clear to the investigators that the disappearance had occurred within a matter of minutes, in a place where nothing seemed to threaten someone as experienced as Eli Turner. And yet, he had vanished, completely. As the sun dropped lower, the team regrouped. Their first round of observations suggested one inescapable conclusion. The scene was physically consistent with normal human behavior, yet its outcome defied expectations. There were no supernatural forces at play. There were no shadows, no strange sounds, no impossible events. Only a man, a frozen lake, and the reality that someone could disappear entirely in the Alaskan wilderness, without leaving anything behind that could fully explain it. The lake had offered its first clues, and for the searchers and investigators, those clues were enough to raise more questions than answers. As night fell over Kasiluk Lake, the search team retreated to a nearby shelter to review the day's findings. Every footprint, every impression, every item collected was meticulously logged and photographed. By now the reality was clear. Eli Turner had vanished in broad daylight, leaving only traces of normal human activity. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of an attack, nothing that suggested foul play beyond the natural hazards of the wilderness. Back at the command center, investigators began piecing together possible scenarios. The first consideration was environmental. Even the most experienced outdoorsman can misjudge the Alaskan winter. Ice thickness can vary unexpectedly. Subtle temperature shifts create stress cracks invisible to the naked eye. The snow itself can conceal unstable surfaces. One theory suggested that Eli could have stepped onto a thin patch of ice, causing him to fall into the freezing water. However, the GPS and camera locations complicated this explanation. Both items were found intact on the ice, not in the water, suggesting he had not immediately fallen in. Another hypothesis focused on human error. Even a veteran traveler can make small mistakes, slipping on the ice, tripping over hidden obstacles, or wandering slightly off course and losing his bearings. The abrupt end of Eli's footprints aligned with the possibility that he moved carefully and deliberately, then encountered a sudden obstacle that prevented him from continuing. Yet, no evidence in the immediate area indicated such an obstruction. No fallen trees, no hidden holes, nothing to explain a sudden stop. Wildlife was also considered. Wolves and moose inhabit the area, and bears are not uncommon. But the scene presented no evidence of animal interference. The footprints showed no signs of struggle or chase, and none of Eli's equipment had been disturbed. It seemed improbable that a large animal had been involved without leaving a trace. The search perimeter expanded. Teams moved beyond the lake's immediate shoreline into the surrounding forest, tracing the faint tracks of a man who knew the terrain, but whose trail now ended inexplicably. Drones were deployed to scan the ice from above, and thermal imaging devices attempted to detect heat signatures in the dense forest. Nothing was found. Locals were interviewed, hikers, hunters, and even indigenous guides who knew the lake well offered insights. Most described Kasiluk Lake as deceptively calm. To the untrained eye, the ice appears solid, yet subtle pressure points and weak patches can make the lake dangerous even to those experienced in winter trekking. One local guide noted, "It looks safe, it feels safe, but it only takes one step in the wrong place and you're gone before you know it." Investigators compiled these observations, forming a picture that was entirely grounded in reality, yet still frustratingly incomplete. Every plausible explanation, environmental hazard, accident, misstep, encounter with wildlife, accounted for parts of the scene, but none explained how an experienced outdoorsman could vanish so completely, leaving behind equipment and footprints, yet never returning. The search area continued to expand as night fell a second time. Teams combed the surrounding hills and valleys, probing into smaller tributary lakes and forested ravines. Helicopters scanned from above, yet the vast whiteness of the snow and ice made visibility difficult. For every clue uncovered, several questions remained unanswered. By the end of the day, the conclusion was as sobering as it was simple. Eli Turner, an experienced photographer with years of backcountry experience, had disappeared in an area that was dangerous, yet familiar. No supernatural elements were at play, only the harsh and unpredictable reality of Alaska's winter wilderness. And the mystery remained. In a landscape mapped, measured, and studied for centuries, a single man could vanish without leaving a full explanation. Investigators planned the next steps carefully. Ice thickness would be tested systematically. Environmental data would be reviewed, and search patterns adjusted to focus on the subtle irregularities of the terrain. Every possible angle, every logical hypothesis would be explored. Yet despite methodical planning and realistic expectations, Kasiluk Lake had already revealed a crucial truth. In Alaska, even those best prepared are never fully in control of the land. And for Eli Turner, the answers to what had happened that day remained elusive. By the third day of the search, conditions at Kasiluk Lake remained harsh. Temperatures had dropped below 15 degrees, and a biting wind swept across the ice, turning each step into a reminder of the wilderness's unforgiving nature. The search team had expanded its perimeter, combing nearby forests, ridges, and tributary streams, yet Eli Turner remained missing. It was during a systematic sweep of the lake's edge that the first significant discovery was made. Investigators noticed a subtle irregularity in the snow, a shallow indentation, roughly the size of a human footprint, leading toward a thinner section of ice. Unlike the clearly defined tracks from earlier, this mark was faint, almost erased by drifting snow. But its placement suggested movement toward the lake, not away from it. Specialists in ice safety and wilderness travel were brought in. They examined the frozen surface carefully, measuring thickness and testing stability with weighted poles. Their conclusion was revealing. Although most of the lake was solid, certain patches near the shoreline were thinner and deceptively weak. A person stepping onto these areas could experience a sudden, unstable collapse without warning. Nearby, the searchers also recovered Eli's second camera, partially covered by snow, placed face up as if it had been set down deliberately. The GPS beacon, still operational, was found several meters away, positioned similarly to the first day's discovery. Analysis suggested that Eli had been methodical possibly reorganizing gear or adjusting camera settings, when he reached this precarious section of ice. This raised the first plausible scenario: a sudden accident due to unstable ice. Even a skilled outdoorsman like Eli could have stepped onto a weak patch, causing him to fall into the frigid water beneath. Yet no traces of the fall were visible at the surface. The ice had not broken fully, and drifted snow had quickly covered minor disturbances. In sub-zero conditions, the lake could conceal a hazard almost instantly. Investigators also noted minor anomalies in the surrounding snow, faint impressions of a hand or elbow near the edge of the thin ice, suggesting someone may have tried to steady themselves. There were no signs of struggle, no drag marks, nothing indicating an attack or animal encounter. It was entirely consistent with an accident, sudden, solitary, and unrecorded by anyone present. Interviews with local guides further reinforced this theory. Many had avoided Kasiluk Lake during deep winter precisely because of unpredictable ice conditions. One veteran trekker stated, "You can walk on ice all day and think it's safe. Then one step and it gives. That's all it takes in these parts." Despite this explanation, the disappearance was still unusual. Eli's equipment, carefully placed cameras, and footprints showed deliberate, controlled movement. Nothing indicated panic before the event. A person falling into thin ice often leaves chaotic prints or attempts to climb back onto the surface. Here, the print stopped cleanly, suggesting either a brief misstep or a momentary accident that removed him from immediate visibility. Search efforts continued with this in mind. Divers were deployed when conditions permitted, but the lake's depth, icy water, and unstable top layer prevented full underwater sweeps. Drones scanned above, revealing only a featureless expanse of snow and ice. On the surrounding forested edges, no additional tracks or signs of passage were found. By the end of the day, investigators consolidated all findings. They had a realistic reconstruction of the final moments. Eli approached the thin section of ice, carefully handling his equipment, possibly testing footing or setting up a shot. The ice gave way or shifted under him, causing him to enter the water or fall beneath a hidden opening. Drifted snow quickly erased surface evidence, leaving only the faintest impressions of movement and no clear trail leading back to solid ground. In other words, the disappearance could be explained entirely by the hazards of the Alaskan wilderness: subtle ice instability, extreme cold, and isolation. There were no mysteries beyond the natural world, yet the result was the same. Eli Turner had vanished. The final critical discovery was also a stark reminder of the environment's severity. Small personal items, a glove, a lens cap, were later recovered several meters from the thin patch, suggesting that even controlled movement could be disrupted in moments, leaving only fragments of the person's presence behind. Every clue reinforced the same point: the lake had taken him, and there was nothing more to indicate how or why beyond the inherent dangers of ice and winter wilderness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the ice in pale orange light, the search teams prepared for another long night. They had reconstructed the sequence of events as best as possible: deliberate approach, careful handling of equipment, sudden accident due to environmental hazard, and disappearance. Logical, realistic, yet still haunting. In the vast and indifferent landscape of Alaska, even the most experienced outdoorsman could vanish completely, leaving only the cold, silent traces of his presence behind. The day after the critical discoveries, the search at Kasiluk Lake intensified. Multiple teams coordinated a broader perimeter, combing the surrounding forested slopes and the lake's frozen surface with a systematic approach. Every footprint, every indentation in the snow, and every subtle variation in the ice was carefully cataloged. The search now involved troopers, local guides, volunteers, and wilderness specialists, a coalition brought together by urgency and concern. Investigators used advanced search techniques to tackle the harsh Alaskan conditions. Thermal imaging cameras scanned the lake's surface and forest edges, attempting to detect heat signatures that might indicate someone trapped or injured. Drones hovered over the ice, their high-resolution cameras capturing vast expanses that human teams could never cover on foot. GPS data from Eli's beacon was analyzed to confirm the exact location of his last known movements. Specialists in cold weather survival and ice behavior were consulted. They explained the subtle dangers of Kasiluk Lake. While the majority of the ice appeared solid, pressure points and microfractures could exist just beneath the surface, invisible to anyone walking above. A person stepping on such a patch could experience a sudden collapse or sink partially, creating no obvious traces on the surface. The investigators compared this with Eli's last known footprints and equipment placement, constructing a timeline of what might have occurred. Meanwhile, local hunters and hikers were interviewed. Many had traversed the region for decades and knew the lake's quirks intimately. One experienced guide noted, "You can spend hours on that ice and think it's safe, but it only takes one weak spot and it's over in seconds. Even the most careful person can't predict it." These insights reinforce the leading theory. The disappearance was the result of an environmental accident, not human foul play. Search teams also revisited the surrounding forest, focusing on the trail connecting the SUV to the lake. They noted how subtle changes in snow texture and wind direction could erase tracks quickly. Each day, new snowfall partially obscured previous evidence, making the investigation a race against nature itself. Teams meticulously documented every clue, ensuring no detail was overlooked. Divers were deployed where the lake allowed, probing shallow areas for any sign of Eli or displaced equipment. Ice thickness and water currents were analyzed. The divers reported that submerged hazards like hidden ridges or sudden drops beneath the ice could trap a person out of immediate sight. Yet even with underwater searches, no trace was found. The investigation also expanded to analyze Eli's preparation and experience. His maps, journals, and planning notes showed deliberate, careful choices. He had a clear understanding of the terrain, carried proper survival gear, and was physically fit for the conditions. The fact that someone so skilled could vanish reinforced the lake's unpredictability and the extreme difficulty of surviving or leaving traceable evidence in that environment. By the fourth day, patterns began to emerge. Small items, a glove, a lens cap, were recovered near the thin section of ice, confirming that Eli's presence had been concentrated in that area. Footprints remained abruptly terminated as if a sudden environmental factor had intervened. Nothing suggested foul play, and yet the disappearance remained inexplicable in human terms. A person moving carefully, deliberately, and prepared had simply vanished. As night fell each day, search teams returned to their temporary shelters, reviewing notes, photographs, and GPS data. Every logical theory was examined, every plausible accident considered, and still the lake kept its secret. Kasiluk Lake, frozen and silent, became a study in the extremes of wilderness hazards. Every snowdrift, every crack in the ice, and every subtle tilt of the frozen surface could alter a person's fate. For Eli Turner, the combination of preparation, experience, and careful movement was no guarantee. Nature, as it often does, remained indifferent, and the searchers were reminded that even the smallest lapse, the subtlest shift in ice, could result in total disappearance. The ongoing investigation now faced its greatest challenge, reconstructing the final moments on the lake while contending with snow, ice, and weather that erased evidence as quickly as it appeared. Every day, the mystery deepened, leaving only fragments, footprints, equipment, and the faintest signs of human presence to guide them. By the 6th day of the search, investigators had gathered a wealth of information. Every footprint, camera location, and item found on the lake had been logged and analyzed. They knew where Eli had been last, the route he had taken, and the approximate time window of his disappearance. Yet the outcome remained the same. A man, experienced and careful, had vanished in an environment that, while predictable in some respects, held hidden dangers that could turn fatal in seconds. Specialists began systematically eliminating possibilities. Foul play was considered and quickly ruled out. The SUV showed no signs of tampering, there were no suspicious tracks in the surrounding snow, and nothing suggested another person had been present. Wildlife, too, appeared unlikely. Tracks and scat in the area showed typical movement patterns, and no predator could have removed a person without leaving unmistakable traces. Attention then turned entirely to the environment itself. The lake's ice, though largely solid, had subtle inconsistencies. Experts measured thickness along dozens of points, noting slight depressions, cracks, and stress fractures invisible to the naked eye. One conclusion was increasingly plausible. Eli may have stepped onto an unstable patch which could have shifted under him, causing a partial submersion or sudden fall into cold water. The lack of chaotic tracks or signs of struggle suggested he may have had only moments to react, enough to set down equipment, but not enough to escape. Investigators also considered human factors. Fatigue, cold, and mental focus all play roles in accidents. Even an experienced hiker can misjudge footing or overestimate ice stability after hours of walking. Hypothermia, though not yet advanced, could have dulled his perception, making a minor misstep catastrophic. Every recovered item, a glove, a lens cap, a partially used thermos, reinforced the scenario of someone caught off guard by a hidden environmental hazard. Meanwhile, search teams continued their sweep of the surrounding forest and tributary lakes. Thermal imaging yielded no heat signatures. Drones revealed only the vast, frozen expanse, the tree line stretching endlessly into white. Divers probing shallow areas detected nothing. It was as if Eli had simply vanished into the lake itself, leaving only fragments of his presence behind. With these findings, investigators were able to narrow the possibilities to a few realistic outcomes. Accidental fall through thin or unstable ice, leading to submersion. Hidden ice fractures or pressure ridges, causing a sudden and fatal mishap. Minor disorientation or fatigue, combined with environmental hazards, resulting in an accident. Each scenario was grounded in reality, supported by evidence, and consistent with the abrupt ending of Eli's footprints. None involved foul play, animals, or supernatural causes, only the unpredictable danger of a winter wilderness. The search strategy adjusted accordingly. Teams focused on high-risk areas of the lake, systematically checking every weak point. Divers mapped potential underwater hazards. Footprints leading from the shore were examined to determine the exact moment Eli might have encountered unstable ice. Snow and wind were tracked to understand how they could obscure evidence, ensuring no detail was overlooked. Despite these efforts, the human element remained a mystery. Eli had been experienced, methodical, and cautious. Yet even careful preparation could not overcome the lake's hidden hazards. Every finding reinforced a simple, chilling truth. In Alaska, no matter how skilled or prepared, nature ultimately dictates the outcome. By evening, the teams regrouped. Notes, photographs, and GPS data were reviewed. Every eliminated possibility made the remaining options more compelling, more concrete, but none provided a complete answer. The lake had revealed its secret slowly, offering fragments, but Eli Turner himself remained absent, leaving only traces of deliberate movement and the silent, frozen expanse that had swallowed him. On the seventh day of the search, with snow falling lightly and visibility limited, a separate team of volunteers was following a side trail several miles from Kasiluk Lake. They were not directly on the main search route, instead scanning the surrounding forest, checking areas that could have been missed in the first sweep. And then, almost accidentally, they found it, a single leather glove, partially buried in the snow. It was worn and rigid from cold, but there was something unmistakable, a dark stain on the palm, blood. The discovery sent shock waves through the team. The glove was measured and mapped. It lay over 10 miles from the lake, far beyond the primary search perimeter. Photographs were taken immediately, and the item was carefully packaged and sent for forensic analysis. Within hours, results came back. The blood on the glove matched Eli Turner. Questions exploded. Why was Eli's glove so far from the lake? Why would it be there when his footprints and equipment at Kasiluk Lake indicated careful, deliberate movement? The lake had been thoroughly searched. Snow and wind may erase footprints, but the surrounding area had no trace of him. No other items were found nearby. The glove's location seemed impossible, inconsistent with the controlled scene around the lake. Investigators faced new uncertainties. The discovery suggested a new possibility. Eli had moved or been moved somehow over 10 miles from the last known point, or something had occurred that displaced personal items unexpectedly. Theories now had to account for this anomaly: accidental drift, deliberate movement, or some external factor yet unknown. The logical gaps became profound, even in a completely natural context. With this new information, the focus of the investigation shifted. Police began to look beyond environmental causes and accidental scenarios, considering the people in Eli's life. Who could have interacted with him before his disappearance? Who might have had knowledge or motives? Investigators interviewed colleagues, friends, and family. One area of interest quickly emerged: Eli's closest friend, the same person who had reported him missing. He was cooperative, providing exact times, messages, and attempts to reach Eli. Yet, the financial records revealed a complicating factor. He had borrowed a significant sum of money from Eli shortly before the trip. The team examined this potential motive carefully. Despite the financial connection, nothing implicated him in wrongdoing. He had been the first to alert authorities, had an alibi corroborated by multiple sources, and no evidence suggested intent to harm. The investigators concluded he had neither opportunity nor incentive to cause Eli's disappearance. Still, the glove cast a shadow over the investigation. The questions it raised were immediate and unsettling. Why was the glove found so far from the lake, where the search had otherwise found no evidence of Eli? If he had accidentally fallen through ice at Kasiluk Lake, how could a single item travel such a distance alone? Had Eli moved through the forest after leaving the lake, and if so, why had no footprints or other signs been detected? And most importantly, was Eli still alive? Or had he succumbed to the unforgiving wilderness, leaving behind only scattered traces? Investigators knew one thing with certainty. The disappearance was no longer just about environmental hazards or misjudged ice. The glove had reopened the case, forcing the team to re-examine every assumption. Every colleague, friend, and family member would be questioned, every route and location analyzed, and every small clue re-evaluated in light of this new, impossible discovery. The search had moved from the lake itself to the wider Alaskan wilderness. Each passing hour intensified the stakes. The questions had multiplied, and the answers, if they existed, remained elusive. For the first time, the investigation was no longer just about where Eli had gone, but how and why, in a vast, indifferent landscape, a man could vanish and leave behind a single, blood-stained glove 10 miles from the last confirmed location. The puzzle was far from solved, and as the team prepared to expand the search and re-interview every connection in Eli's life, one reality remained. The wilderness had revealed its danger, but the human element had introduced questions no one had anticipated. The discovery of Eli Turner's blood-stained glove had shifted the investigation dramatically. The lake, once the primary focus, became only one piece of a much larger puzzle. Police realized they had to expand their inquiry beyond environmental hazards and accidental falls. Investigators returned to Talkeetna, interviewing everyone who had known Eli in the weeks before his disappearance. Colleagues, friends, and family members were questioned in detail. They were asked about work tensions, financial disputes, recent arguments, or unusual behavior. One thread drew particular attention. Eli's closest friend, the same person who had first reported him missing. Financial records confirmed that he had borrowed a significant sum of money from Eli prior to the trip. Could that have been a motive? At first glance, it seemed plausible, yet every fact cleared him. He had provided a time-stamped trail of messages and calls, corroborated by other friends and family, proving he could not have confronted Eli during the disappearance. His demeanor was consistent, cooperative, and transparent. Investigators concluded he had neither opportunity nor motive to harm Eli. The focus then shifted to Eli's professional life. His photography work occasionally brought him into contact with competitors and clients, but interviews revealed no significant disputes or threats. Some colleagues mentioned minor disagreements over scheduling and assignments, but nothing that could escalate into violence. Each potential lead ended with the same conclusion. Eli's disappearance was not the result of foul play from someone close. Meanwhile, the team returned to the wilderness. Using the new information about the glove's location, searchers examined the terrain between Kasiluk Lake and the site where it was found. Snowfall had partially erased tracks, but subtle signs, bent branches, slight depressions in snow, and displaced vegetation suggested a possible route. Could Eli have moved on his own, or had environmental factors transported the glove independently? Wind, snow, or water flow might explain small items moving far from their origin, but a leather glove heavy with moisture and blood moving 10 miles through dense forest without leaving any trace was perplexing. Specialists in wilderness survival and cold weather behavior were consulted. They recreated possible scenarios, including attempts to navigate around thin ice, slips on steep slopes, and exposure to hypothermia. In each simulation, objects could be dropped, but none could account for the distance the glove traveled without additional signs of Eli's passage. Investigators also considered more complex hypotheses: accidental injury at the lake, then partial movement away from the ice, disorientation leading him into the forest, or even falling into a hidden ravine where tracks could not be seen. Each possibility was logical, yet none fully explained the combination of deliberate, careful movement near the lake and the glove found miles away. The team returned repeatedly to the timeline of Eli's last confirmed movements, piecing together every detail: the exact time he left the lodge, the last text sent to his friend, the footprints on the lake ice, the placement of his equipment, and now the glove. Each element suggested a cautious, experienced individual suddenly caught in a situation he could not control. Questions loomed over the investigators like the low Alaskan sun. Why had the glove been separated from him by so many miles? Had he wandered further into the wilderness on his own, or had something else intervened? Was Eli still alive, or had exposure claimed him? And most importantly, if he had been alone and careful, how could someone so experienced vanish entirely? By the end of the 9th day, police had narrowed the investigation to a combination of environmental hazards and unknown factors, supplemented by thorough analysis of relationships and motivations. The financial link with his friend had been ruled out. Workplace tensions yielded no suspects. The wilderness itself remained the most likely agent of disappearance, but it offered no definitive answers. The case had entered a new phase. The search was no longer just physical, following footprints and equipment. It had become analytical and investigative, balancing hard evidence from the field with human factors, timelines, and behavioral analysis. Each clue added clarity, yet the disappearance remained a haunting mystery. A man, skilled and deliberate, had vanished into the Alaskan wilderness, leaving behind only a trail of questions, fragments of evidence, and the cold, indifferent landscape itself. And as search teams prepared for another day, the ultimate question remained unanswered. What truly happened to Eli Turner? Was he still alive, or had the wilderness claimed him completely? Days turned into a week, then more. Search teams expanded their efforts, probing the frozen expanse of Kasiluk Lake and the surrounding forests. But every lid seemed to circle back to the same frustrating truth. Eli Turner had disappeared. Every footprint, every piece of equipment, every clue told a story of deliberate, careful movement. Yet none explained his ultimate fate. The blood-stained glove, found over 10 miles from the lake, remained a haunting puzzle. Its location contradicted everything investigators believed about the environment and Eli's behavior. How had it ended up there? Was it a clue to something unseen, or merely an inexplicable fragment in the vast Alaskan wilderness? No one could say. Interviews with colleagues, friends, and family offered no answers. The financial connection with his closest friend, the possibility of disputes at work, even interactions with strangers, all were explored, ruled out, or left inconclusive. The meticulous investigation revealed nothing concrete, only a tangle of possibilities. As search teams documented the last known points of Eli's movements, measured ice thickness, and mapped the surrounding forest, one thing became painfully clear: the wilderness was indifferent. Alaska, with its frozen lakes, hidden pressure cracks, and miles of unbroken forest, held its secrets tightly. It gave no warnings, left no guidance, and sometimes erased even the most careful traces. For investigators and searchers, questions remained. Had Eli wandered farther than anyone realized, or had something else occurred? Was he alive, somewhere in the vast landscape waiting to be found? Or had the harsh winter claimed him silently? Could the glove, the footprints, the carefully placed equipment, or the scattered personal items ever tell the full story? Even the experts could offer only probabilities, theories grounded in experience and painstaking analysis. Nothing could bridge the gap between what had been observed and the ultimate outcome. And so the case remained open. The lake lay silent, frozen under the pale winter sun. The forest stretched endlessly beyond. Every step that searchers had taken, every hour spent analyzing evidence, only underscored one undeniable fact. In this part of Alaska, even the most skilled and prepared individual could vanish completely, leaving nothing but fragments and unanswered questions behind. For Eli Turner, the wilderness had not provided answers. For those left searching, the story was incomplete, unresolved, and haunting. The open snow, the frozen lake, the distant forest, all remained witnesses to a disappearance that may never be explained. And so the mystery of Kasiluk Lake endures. A man vanished, a glove appeared far from the scene, and the questions remain, unanswered, unrelenting, and unsolved. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next videos, where we continue to follow the mysteries that have never slept. Don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned